When the name Zyzz first appeared on the internet, nobody could have imagined that a skinny Australian teenager with an unusual personality would eventually become a symbol of an entire generation, because he did not simply start working out and build an impressive physique. He created an image that inspired thousands of young people to walk into a gym for the first time, believe that they could transform themselves, and understand that the person they saw in the mirror did not have to be the person they remained forever. But behind the photographs, the parties, the confidence, the endless jokes, and the image of a man who seemed completely free from consequences, there was another side to Zyzz's life that people rarely talked about, because alongside his incredible popularity came steroid use, recreational drugs, an extreme lifestyle, and constant pressure to maintain a physique and personality that millions of people had come to associate with him. In 2011, that story suddenly came to an end when Aziz Sergeyevich, the man the internet knew as Zyzz, died in Thailand at only 22 years old. And after his death, an endless debate began about what had happened to his body, what role his lifestyle may have played, and whether the substances he had used could have contributed to the tragedy, although the exact circumstances surrounding his death were far more complicated than the simplified stories that later spread across the internet. But the strangest part of the story is what happened next, because Zyzz did not disappear when his life ended. He became even more influential. His photographs continued spreading across social media, his phrases became memes, and thousands of young people began training because of a man who had once simply wanted to become someone completely different from the person he saw in the mirror. This is not simply a story about steroids, drugs, or death, but a story about how one young man transformed fitness culture, became an icon to millions, and at the same time created a lifestyle and an image that carried a price far darker than most of his followers could ever have imagined.
Before Zyzz became an internet legend, there was no perfect physique, no army of followers, no iconic personality, and no image of a man who seemed destined to live forever in the culture of the internet, because Aziz Sergeyevich had once been simply a young man who felt uncomfortable with his appearance and wanted to change what he saw in the mirror. And that dissatisfaction eventually became the starting point of a transformation that would completely change the direction of his life. He began training not as a future celebrity, but as an ordinary young man who wanted to change his body. Yet as his muscles grew, his appearance became more noticeable, and photographs of his transformation began spreading online. Something much bigger started happening, because people were not only fascinated by his physique, but also by his personality, his confidence, his humor, and his ability to turn bodybuilding into something that felt less like a strict sport and more like an entire lifestyle built around self-expression. And this was where the phenomenon truly began, because Zyzz was not selling people the idea of becoming professional bodybuilders or promising them a perfect life through endless workouts. He was selling something much simpler and much more powerful, the belief that you could completely reinvent yourself until one day the people who once ignored you would barely recognize the person standing in front of them. And for thousands of young men growing up with insecurities about their appearance, that message was more powerful than almost any traditional fitness motivation. His physique became visual proof of that philosophy. His photographs spread across forums and social media. His unusual behavior and provocative personality turned him into an internet character. And with every new photograph, video, and meme, his influence grew larger, creating an image of someone who seemed completely fearless, someone who refused to apologize for being different, and who appeared determined to live according to his own rules, no matter what anyone else thought. But this is where the story begins to become much darker, because as his popularity grew, so did the pressure to constantly maintain the image he had created, while extreme training, an increasingly intense social life, and the use of substances that could seriously affect the body became part of the world surrounding him. And although it would be dishonest to claim that these substances were proven to be the direct cause of his death, their presence in his story forces us to ask a far more uncomfortable question. Where does the desire to improve yourself end, and where does obsession with the image you created begin?
By the beginning of the 2010s, Zyzz had stopped being simply a young man posting photographs from the gym because his name had transformed into an internet phenomenon followed by thousands of young people who copied his appearance, repeated his phrases, shared his photographs, and dreamed of achieving even a fraction of the physique that had made Aziz Sergeyevich one of the most recognizable fitness personalities of his generation. But behind that popularity was a price that far fewer people wanted to talk about, because Zyzz had built an image of someone who never stopped, constantly training, partying, traveling, joking, and maintaining a physique that demanded an extreme level of dedication. And when millions of people begin expecting you to remain the same character every single day, a dangerous trap can appear. Because you are no longer simply trying to look a certain way, you begin to feel as if you are obligated to remain that person forever. It is well documented that Zyzz used anabolic steroids, and that fact is an important part of his story. But it is equally important to separate confirmed information from the countless myths that appeared after his death. Because over the years, his name became surrounded by rumors, exaggerated claims, and simplistic explanations attempting to connect his entire lifestyle to his death, even though the actual circumstances were far more complicated, and there is no responsible basis for claiming that steroids or recreational drugs alone were proven to be the single cause of what happened to him. At the same time, the risks of such a lifestyle cannot simply be ignored, because combining intense physical training, anabolic substances, partying, recreational drug use, extreme dieting or physique maintenance, and the constant pressure to remain visually impressive can place enormous stress on the body, especially when a young person begins treating his body not as something that needs to be protected, but as a machine that can be pushed further and further for another photograph, another night, another moment of attention, or another reminder that the transformation is still real. That is why the story of Zyzz should never be remembered only as a motivational transformation, because the desire to become better is not dangerous by itself, but it can become dangerous when self-improvement turns into obsession, when rest feels like weakness, when stopping feels like failure, and when a person becomes so attached to the identity they have created that they are willing to keep pushing even when the price is becoming impossible to ignore. During the final months of his life, Zyzz continued traveling, enjoying the lifestyle his followers had come to associate with him, and remaining the same charismatic figure that people saw through their screens, which made what happened next even more shocking, because nobody expected the story of a young man who appeared so energetic, confident, and almost invincible to suddenly end thousands of kilometers away from home in Thailand, where a 22-year-old would become seriously ill and collapse, leaving the people around him desperately trying to understand what was happening. And yet, at that moment, almost nobody could understand what would happen after his death, because instead of disappearing with the person behind the image, Zyzz's character began taking on a life of its own, transforming from an internet personality into a symbol of an entire fitness culture. And that is what makes his story so disturbing and fascinating at the same time. The man was gone, but the legend had only just begun.
When the news of Zyzz's death reached the internet in August 2011, it felt almost impossible for many people to accept, because the man who had become a symbol of youth, confidence, energy, freedom, and physical transformation was suddenly gone at only 22 years old. And that number made the tragedy even more disturbing, because a life that seemed to be only beginning had suddenly ended in Thailand, leaving thousands of followers staring at old photographs and videos while trying to understand how someone who looked so full of life could disappear without warning. Reports stated that Zyzz became unwell while in a sauna and eventually collapsed, and despite attempts to provide medical assistance, he could not be saved, while later reports described cardiac arrest as the immediate cause, although the circumstances surrounding his death became the subject of endless speculation, particularly regarding his use of anabolic steroids and recreational drugs. And although those factors remain an important part of the discussion, it would be irresponsible to claim that they were definitively proven to be the direct cause of his death without sufficient medical evidence. But regardless of the exact medical explanation, his story forces us to confront something far more uncomfortable, because the human body can appear incredibly powerful on the outside while remaining vulnerable on the inside. And a photograph showing enormous muscles can never reveal the condition of the heart, the cardiovascular system, or the internal organs, which means that the culture of extreme physical appearance can sometimes create a dangerous illusion that looking stronger automatically means being healthier, more durable, or somehow immune to consequences. And yet, after his death, something completely unexpected happened, because instead of fading away with time, Zyzz became even more influential. His old photographs continued spreading across social media. His videos reached new audiences. His phrases became part of internet culture, and young people who had never met him began entering gyms because they had seen his transformation and thought for the first time that perhaps they too could become someone completely different from the person staring back at them in the mirror.
And perhaps this is the most important part of his legacy, because Zyzz was never the greatest professional bodybuilder. He never won Mr. Olympia, and he never created some revolutionary scientific training system. Yet he accomplished something that many professional athletes never managed to accomplish. He made ordinary people want to start training, stop being ashamed of their bodies, become more confident, and believe that changing their lives could begin with something as simple as walking into a gym and taking the first step. But his story must remain complicated, because we cannot romanticize only the attractive side of Zyzz while ignoring the darker one. We cannot turn steroid use and recreational drugs into symbols of a glamorous lifestyle while simultaneously speaking about health. And we cannot forget that behind the internet character was a real young man who wanted to transform himself, gained extraordinary fame, and ultimately lived far fewer years than anyone should have expected. Perhaps that is why the name Zyzz still exists today, because his story became a paradox. The man who wanted to transform his body ended up transforming an entire internet fitness culture. The man who represented absolute freedom left behind a warning about the potential price of that lifestyle. And the young man who died at 22 continues motivating people who never even had the chance to meet him. Which is why Zyzz became a legend, not because he was invincible, but because his story eventually reminded an entire generation that even the strongest-looking person can still be incredibly fragile.